The American naturalist and philosopher Henry David Thoreau once said, "Many people go fishing all their lives without knowing it's not the fish they're after." When I think about that quote down by the Rye River here in Kildare, it kind of makes sense to me. The peacefulness of the surroundings, the sounds of the water, the wind, the stillness of anglers standing in the river, the salmon, trout and pike swimming below. The Rye is home to many fish and many anglers, so today we're going to look at the importance of the waterways for everyone. I'm Liam Geraghty, and this is Stories from the Rye.
This time of the year now, you're beginning to see the plants coming along. The first flower you get to see now is a small little member of the buttercup family, a thing called a celandine. It's like a buttercup, only it has 8 petals rather than 6, and it has leaves like heart shapes.
The mission of Inland Fisheries Ireland aims to protect, manage and conserve our inland fisheries and sea angling resources, and to maximise their sustainability and natural biodiversity. So who better to talk to about the Rye and its importance than Fergal Caffrey?
Right, well, I'm Fergal Caffrey. I'm an assistant inspector with Inland Fisheries Ireland. I'm based in City West. We cover the rivers in Dublin, Wicklow and North Kildare. So the Rye water is part of the Liffey catchment, so we cover the Rye water.
So just what is Inland Fisheries?
Well, we're the statutory organisation responsible for actual salmonids and other species in our waters. We cover all inland waters, and then we have a remit of coastal areas as well, estuaries and such like. So we'd be covering bass, and we have bass legislation. We have legislation to do with trout and salmon and coarse fish, pike, roach and perch. So it's pretty much to conserve those species as best we can.
A typical day for Fergal? Well, there really isn't one.
We're out in the rivers pretty much, so we're field officers, so we're out and about, and we're either, like this time of year, we'd be checking raids to see if fish are spawned. So on the Rye water we'd have brown trout and we'd have salmon, so we'd be checking what the spawning was like this season. Also, like, we'd be checking the canals, we'd be checking for guys fishing and just interacting with people from that respect. We have a broad remit, and we're out and about most days, Liam, just checking on rivers, the pollution as well, and all that sort of stuff.
So Fergal, what is the importance of the waterways?
Well, they're extremely important, like from a human point of view, for, it's great to have them, and they're a resource, to use from water abstraction point of view, from a hydroelectric point of view. So they give us so much. So it's very important that we don't abuse them, and that we make sure that they're in a healthy situation vis-a-vis water quality and also habitat. So it's very important that we don't really crowd rivers. We leave them natural as possible, and we enjoy the amenity that they provide.
We seem to have collectively gotten our act together in looking after our waterways. Do you think we took them for granted in the past?
Well, I think we're actually coming full circle, to be quite honest, Liam. I think in the past we abused them to a degree. We kind of were using them for dams and for, obviously, throughout the last 100 years or stuff, like, we used them for making electricity in mills and stuff like that. So we have used them, and we're kind of beginning to appreciate them now much better.
Fergal says the Rye is one of the biggest tributaries of the River Liffey.
So it's extremely important in the fact that obviously the River Liffey goes into a capital city and there's a lot of pressures on it. So the Rye water is really extremely important from a fishery point of view. It has very good brown trout stocks. It has good spawning for salmon as well, and it's extremely important because the Liffey is impacted by different barriers and stuff. So salmon use the Rye water as a spawning area. So it's extremely important. Well, on the Rye water, this time of year, we'd be checking for spawning because fish spawn kind of November, December, and early January time. So we'd be checking that this time of year. In the summertime, we'd be carrying out surveys, electrofishing surveys, just to see what stocks are like, just to see if there's good numbers of salmon fry and brown trout fry, and just general checking the river. And if there's guys fishing the river, we might have a chat with them. Like the Rye water anglers are very good. The Leixlip anglers keep an eye on the river from that point of view. If there's anybody, let's say, illegal fishing or, fishing without a license or a permit, but we'd help them out as well from that point of view.
Aidan Crean is chairperson of the local angling club, the Leixlip and District Anglers Association.
I also sit on the environmental subcommittee in Intel, the Friends of the Rye Water. Deeply interested, as are all the lads in the club, in preserving the river and looking after it, as well as preserving the fishing therein.
Aidan says the Rye played a part in the lives of almost everyone in the surrounding communities.
Almost every kid in Leixlip, back over the generations, would tell you they learned to swim in the 2 swimming holes that were in the Rye water, in Lennon's pool at the back of Intel, and the big sinkhole back of Duncarrick in the middle of Leixlip village. Something that, unfortunately, in a different era, doesn't take place anymore. People have either gotten more frightened, or the litigious nature of society stop anything that people deem to be in any way dangerous. But it's fantastic to see every child in Leixlip years ago would spend their summer swimming in that river. Water quality then over years in every river people got frightened of, and you're listening to cryptosporidium infections in various rivers all around the country, and people just got afraid of rivers, which is a shame. They're fantastic. The Rye is lived through Leixlip, but it has provided fun and food for that village from its inception. My connection with the river was almost exclusively angling, and I remember as a kid being brought by my uncle who lived in Coney over to it. It's one of the finest rivers trout rivers in the country, for something that's so small and comes through 3 major urban centres. It's remarkable that the size of trout it could and can produce. Salmon, Dr. Ken Whelan of the Marine Institute would have, in his book, would mention the Rye as the place where he caught his first salmon ever in his life.
The Rye has always been a significant trout angling river.
Years gone by before arterial drainage, it would also been a salmon river. It was said years ago that people in Leixlip would give you a salmon for a pound of mince beef. They were that fed up eating fish. The runs in those years were so prolific and so easy to harness. Like the Leixlip and District Angling Association, we were basically formed in 1990, and it was actually formed by a group of salmon anglers on the Liffey to try and protect the salmon in the middle of the village, which we saw as being under threat at the time of being closed. It quickly morphed into a club encompassing the River Rye, or Rye Water, whichever title you want to give it. And a significant meeting at the time. We were a small group of anglers. Actually 11 people, including myself, set up the club in that year. And the following year, we made the acquaintance of a man that born and reared in Leixlip, Jim Carroll, who single-handedly took on the protection of that river on his own belt for his entire life. He absolutely lived the river. He got his court-appointed waterkeeper papers, which allowed him basically the same access as IFI fisheries officers, close enough to it, to protect and investigate pollution, poaching incidents. But he operated almost as a one-man band for 30, 40 years. And then when we joined together and formed the club, and he had support and help, Jim unfortunately passed away a little over a year ago, but his legacy lives on, because without that man, I think that the river could possibly have died. Then Intel came on the scene, and we, I think as a club, were probably the first local body, or one of the very first, to engage and form a relationship with them, and which has been progressed ever since. Been absolutely fantastic, despite the obvious harbingers of doom and gloom with, oh God, that could kill the river. Far from it. It has enhanced, and Intel's input into re-enhancement and care of the river has been absolutely significant. And that environmental subcommittee that I mentioned, the Friends of the Rye Water, which includes all the interested stakeholders, including IFI, county councils, Carton Estate, local resident associations, the Angling Club, is significant in keeping the emphasis on that a river that could largely have been forgotten but hasn't been. And in the most recent water quality results will be very promising. It's constantly under threat, as you could understand, from any river that runs through large urbanisations, and certainly Kilcock, Maynooth and Leixlip have exploded and are continuing to explode in the last number of years.
For Aidan, the quote by Henry David Thoreau that I mentioned at the start holds some resonance.
Well, the peace and solitude, and you may go fishing with somebody as a fishing partner, but when you get into that river and move apart, you fish on your own. You're absolutely at one with nature, and particularly, it's amazing that you can be in the middle of Leixlip village. You can't see a thing when you're down the river other than bankside vegetation, and you're hidden and right even up to the back of Intel, on up into Carton Estate and all the way up through when it gets into rural areas. You're just, or any river or any lake in the country, you're in, and if you're in nature, you're one with nature. And if your interest, as mine is, and a lot of people would be that are interested, they just love nature. There are a certain cohort in angling and any other sport who just want to catch fish, but they would be absolutely the minimum. The enjoyment of your surroundings, your environment, it's hard to describe how the therapy of the sound of running water is just, I find it, and a lot of people would find amazing, you know.
Back with Fergal Caffrey of Inland Fisheries Ireland, I wondered how good at angling he was.
I'm a pretty poor angler, to be quite honest. I have a fly rod and I have a spinning rod. I get out every so often, but I wouldn't insult other anglers by calling myself an angler. No, I'm afraid not.
Fergal, what's the biggest threat to our waterways, or is it any one thing?
I don't think it's any one thing. I think water quality is always kind of a constant, really, that it's always, pollution, and it's always thereabouts, so it's always under threat from that point of view, seen as the fact that rivers are kind of interact with humans and humans interact with rivers. That's going to be that's always going to be a problem. Habitat as well, as I mentioned, rivers really need a good riparian zone, it's called. They need a kind of a buffer between man-made structures and the river. So you can have your wildlife corridors, which are important. So those two main things, I think water quality and actual river habitat are extremely important. I think the best thing you can do with a river really is leave it alone in many respects and just give it a bit of space. And I see a lot of, let's say, development works throughout our region that are kind of encroaching on the river, not the Rye water specifically, but in general. And I think the best thing you can do with a lot of rivers and a lot of wildlife is just leave it to its own device. I think that's important on the Rye water as well. Just give it a good riparian zone, leave it to its own device, as I said.
In looking after our waterways, Fergal says partnership with industry is important.
If a business wanted to help a river out, let's put it that way, or wanted to do something positive towards fresh water or a river, we would definitely be interested to make sure that development is done right.
Well, our journey along the Rye has come to an end. We've heard about its rich history, how biologists monitor the river. We've heard of the wildlife who call the river home, and why we all need to play our part in making sure the Rye has a long life for generations to come. Stories from the Rye is proudly produced by Intel Ireland. Today, I'll leave angler Aidan Crean with the last word.
nearly 58 years of age. I fished from the time I was 10 on the local canal here, the Royal Canal. And at that time, there was little or no fishing. It hadn't been developed as it is today. And it was so easy for us to catch fish that I actually gave up because it became too easy. But I was also heavily involved in sports, Gaelic football, hurling. That took my time. And then I met my wife in 1987. And the second time I was actually in her house. Her brother was going fishing. And I said, God, I haven't fished in years. And he gave me a rod and we walked down the Rye. And I caught a fish with my first cast after about 8 years, not having had a rod in my hand. So that I was rehooked. That's simple as that. And I have not stopped since. It's a passion, particularly fly fishing. I absolutely adore it. And as people ask me, is that an elitist thing? Do you fly fish because it's the finest way of fishing? I said, absolutely not. No, it's just the most enjoyable way of catching nothing that I know, because 99% of your fishing time is spent catching nothing. Fly fishing is a great and more enjoyable way to catch nothing.